Today I'll be reading Horrid Henry's Dance Class. Stomp, 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 stomp. Horrid Henry was practicing his elephant dance. Tap, 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 tap. Perfect Peter was practicing his raindrop dance. Peter was practicing being a raindrop for his dance class show. Henry was also supposed to be practicing being a raindrop. But Henry did not want to be a raindrop. He did not want to be a tomato, a string bean, or a banana either. Stomp, stomp, stomp went Henry's heavy boots. Tap, tap, tap went Peter's tap shoes. You're doing it wrong, Henry, said Peter. No, I'm not, said Peter. You are too, said Peter. They're supposed to be raindrops. Stomp, stomp, stomp went Henry's boots. He was an elephant, smashing his way through the jungle, trampling on everyone who stood in his way. I can't concentrate with you stomping, said Peter, and I have to practice my solo. Who cares? Screamed Horrid Henry. I hate dancing. I hate dance class. And most of all, I hate you. This was not entirely true. Horrid Henry loved dancing. Henry danced in his bedroom. Henry danced up and down the stairs. Henry danced on the new sofa and on the kitchen table. What Henry hated was having to dance with other children. Couldn't I go to karate instead? Asked Henry every Saturday. N-O spells no, said Mum. Too violent. Judo? Said Henry. No, said Dad. So every Saturday morning at 9:45 a.m., Henry and Peter's father drove them to Miss Impatience Tutu's dance studio. Miss Impatience Tutu was skinny and bony. She had long, stringy grey hair. Her nose was sharp. Her elbows were pointy. Her knees were knobbly. No one had ever seen her smile. Perhaps this was because Impatience Tutu hated teaching. Impatience Tutu hated noise. Impatience Tutu hated children. But most of all, Impatience Tutu hated Horrid Henry. This was not surprising. Then Miss Tutu shouted, Class, lift your left legs. 11 left legs lifted. One right leg sank to the floor. Then Miss Tutu screamed, Heel toe, heel toe. 11 dainty feet tapped away. One clumpy foot stomped, toe, heel, toe, heel. When Miss Tutu bellowed, Class, skip to your right. 11 bodies turned to the right. One body galloped to the left. Naturally, no one wanted to dance with Henry, or indeed anywhere near Henry. Today's class, unfortunately, was no different. Miss Tutu, Henry's treading on my toes, said Jumpy Jeffrey. Miss Tutu, Henry's kicking my legs, said Lazy Linda. Miss Tutu, Henry's bumping me, said vain Violet. Henry! Screeched Miss Tutu. Yeah, said Henry. I am a patient woman, and you are trying my patience to the limit, hissed Miss Tutu. Any more bad behavior, and you will be very sorry. What will happen? Asked Horrid Henry. Miss Tutu stood very tall. She took a long, bony finger and dragged it slowly across her throat. Henry decided that he would rather live to do battle another day. He stood on the side, gnashing his teeth, pretending he was an enormous crocodile about to gobble up Miss Tutu. This is our final rehearsal before the show, barked Miss Tutu. Everything must be perfect. 11 faces stared at Miss Tutu. One face scowled at the floor. Tomatoes and beans to the front, ordered Miss Tutu. When Miss Thumper plays the music, everyone will stretch out their arms to the sky to kiss the morning hello. Raindrops stand at the back next to the giant green leaves and wait until the beans find the magic bananas. And Henry, spat Miss Tutu, glaring, Try to get it right. Positions, everybody. Miss Thumper, the opening music, please, shouted Miss Tutu. Miss Thumper banged away. The tomatoes weaved in and out, twirling. The beans pirouetted. The bananas pointed their toes and swayed. The raindrops pitter-pattered. All except one. Henry waved his arms frantically and raced around the room. Then he crashed into the beans. "Henry!" screeched Miss Tutu. "Yeah," scowled Henry. "Sit in the corner." Henry was delighted. He sat in the corner and made horrible, rude faces, while Peter did his raindrop solo. Tap, 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 tapper, 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 tap, 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 tapper, tip, tapper, tip, tapper, 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 tip. "Was that perfect, Miss Tutu?" asked Peter. Miss Tutu sighed. "Perfect, Peter, as always," she said, and the corner of her mouth trembled slightly. This was the closest Miss Tutu ever came to smiling. Then she saw Henry slouching on the floor. Her mouth drooped back into its normal, grim position. Miss Tutu tugged Henry off the floor. She shoved him to the very back of the stage, behind the other raindrops. Then she pushed him behind a giant green leaf. "Stand there!" shouted Miss Tutu. "But no one will see me here," said Henry. "Precisely," said Miss Tutu. It was showtime. The curtain was about to rise. The children stood quietly on stage. Perfect Peter was so excited he almost bounced up and down. Naturally, he controlled himself and stood still. Horrid Henry was not very excited. He did not want to be a raindrop, and he certainly did not want to be a raindrop who danced behind a giant green leaf. Miss Thumper waddled over to the piano. She banged on the keys. The curtain went up. Henry's mum and dad were in the audience with the other parents. As usual, they sat in the back row, in case they had to make a quick getaway. They smiled and waved at Peter, standing proudly at the front. "Can you see Henry?" whispered Henry's mum. Henry's dad squinted at the stage. A tuft of red hair stuck up behind the green leaf. "I think that's him, behind the leaf," said his father doubtfully. "I wonder why Henry's hiding," said Mum. "It's not like him to be shy." Said Dad. "Shh!" hissed the parents beside them. Henry watched the tomatoes and beans, searching on tiptoe for the magic bananas. "I'm not staying back here," he thought, and pushed his way through the raindrops. "Stop pushing, Henry!" hissed lazy Linda. Henry pushed harder, then did a few pitter-pats with the other raindrops. Miss Tutu stretched out a bony arm and yanked Henry back behind the scenery. "Who wants to be a raindrop anyway?" thought Henry. "I can do what I like hidden here." The tomatoes weaved in and out, twirling. The beans pirouetted. The bananas pointed their toes and swayed. The raindrops pitter-pattered. Henry flapped his arms and pretended he was a pterodactyl about to pounce on Miss Tutu. Round and round he flew, homing in on his prey. Perfect Peter stepped to the front and began his solo. Tap, 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 tap. Crash! One giant leaf fell on top of the raindrops, knocking them over. The raindrops collided with the tomatoes. The tomatoes smashed into the string beans. The string beans bumped into the bananas. Perfect Peter turned his head to see what was happening and danced off the stage into the front row. Miss Tutu fainted. The only person still standing on stage was Henry. Stomp, 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 stomp. Henry did his elephant dance. Boom, 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 boom. Henry did his wild buffalo dance. Peter tried to scramble back on stage. The curtain fell. There was a long silence. Then Henry's parents clapped. No one else did, so Henry's parents stopped. All the other parents ran up to Miss Tutu and started shouting, "I don't see why that horrid boy should have had such a long solo. while all Linda did was lie on the floor, yelled one mother. My Geoffrey is much better dancer than that boy, shouted another. He should have done that solo. I didn't know you taught modern dance, Miss Tutu, said Violet's mother. Come, Violet, she added, sweeping from the room. Henry! Screeched Miss Tutu. Leave my dance studio at once! Whoopee! Shouted Henry. He knew that next Saturday he would be at karate class at last. I'll be reading Horrid Henry and Moody Margaret. I'm Captain Hook. No, I'm Captain Hook. I'm Captain Hook, said Horrid Henry. I'm Captain Hook, said Moody Margaret. They glared at each other. It's my hook, said Moody Margaret. Moody Margaret lived next door. She did not like Horrid Henry, and Horrid Henry did not like her. But when Rude Ralph was busy, Clever Claire had flu, and Sour Susan was her enemy, Margaret would jump over the wall to play with Henry. Actually, it's my turn to be hooked now, said Perfect Peter. I've been the prisoner for such a long time. Prisoner, be quiet! Prisoner, walk the plank, said Margaret. But I've walked it 14 times already. Please, can I be hooked now? No, by thunder, said Moody Margaret. Now, out of my way, worm! And she swashbuckled across the deck, waving her hook and clutching her sword and dagger. Moody Margaret had eye patches and skulls and crossbones and plumed hats and cutlasses and sabres and snicker-sneeze. Henry had a stick. This was why Henry played with Margaret. But Henry had to do terrible things before playing with Margaret. Before playing with Margaret's swords. Sometimes he had to sit and wait while she read a book. Sometimes he had to play mums and dads with her. Worst of all, please don't tell anyone, sometimes he had to be the baby. Henry never knew what Margaret would do. When he put a spider on her arm, Margaret laughed. When he pulled her hair, Margaret pulled his harder. When Henry screamed, Margaret would scream louder, or she would sing, or pretend not to hear. Sometimes Margaret was fun, but most of the time she was a moody old grouch. I won't play if I can't be Hook, said Horrid Henry. Margaret thought for a moment. We can both be Captain Hook, she said. But we only have one hook, said Henry. Which I haven't played with yet, said Peter. Be quiet, prisoner, shouted Margaret. Mr. Smee, take him to jail. No, said Henry. You will get the reward, Mr. Smee, said the captain, waving her hook. Mr. Smee dragged the prisoner to jail. If you're very quiet, prisoner, then you will be freed and you can be a pirate too, said Captain Hook. Now give me the hook, said Mr. Smee. The captain reluctantly handed it over. Now I'm Captain Hook and you're Mr. Smee, shouted Henry. I order everyone to walk the plank. I'm sick of playing pirates, said Margaret. Let's play something else. Henry was furious. That was just like Moody Margaret. Well, I'm playing pirates, said Henry. Well, I'm not. Give me back my hook, said Margaret. No, said Henry. Moody Margaret opened her mouth and screamed. Once Margaret started screaming, she could go on and on and on. Henry gave her the hook. Margaret smiled. I'm hungry, she said. Got anything good to eat? Henry had 3 bags of crisps and 7 chocolate biscuits hidden in his room. But he certainly wasn't going to share them with Margaret. You can have a radish, said Henry. What else? Said Margaret. A carrot, said Henry. What else? Said Margaret. Glop, said Henry. What's glop? Something special that only I can make, said Henry. What's in it? asked Margaret. That's the secret, said Henry. I bet it's yucky, said Margaret. Of course it's yucky, said Henry. I can make the yuckiest glop of all, said Margaret. That's because you don't know anything. No one can make yuckier glop than I can. I dare you to eat glop, said Margaret. I double dare you back, said Henry. Dares go first. Margaret stood up very straight. All right, said Margaret. Glop starts with snails and worms. And she started poking under the bushes. Got one, she shouted, holding up a fat snail. Now for some worms, said Margaret. She got down on her hands and knees and started digging a hole. You can't put anything from outside in glop, said Henry quickly. Only stuff in the kitchen. Margaret looked at Henry. I thought we were making glop, she said. We are, said Henry. My way, because it's my house. Horrid Henry and moody Margaret went into the gleaming white kitchen. Henry got out 2 wooden mixing spoons and a giant red bowl. I'll start, said Henry. He went to the cupboard and opened the doors wide. Porridge, said Henry, and he poured some into the bowl. Margaret opened the fridge and looked inside. She grabbed a small container. Soggy semolina, shouted Henry, and into the bowl it went. Coleslaw, spinach, coffee, yogurt, flour, vinegar, baked beans, mustard, peanut butter, moldy cheese, pepper, rotten oranges, and ketchup, shouted Henry. He squirted in the ketchup until the bottle was empty. Now mix, said Margaret. Horrid Henry and moody Margaret grabbed hold of their spoons with both hands. Then they plunged their spoons into the glop and began to stir. It was hard, heavy work. Faster and faster, harder and harder they stirred. There was glop on the ceiling. There was glop on the floor. There was glop on the clock. And glop on the door. Margaret's hair was covered in glop. So was Henry's face. Margaret looked into the bowl. She had never seen anything so yucky in her life. It's ready, she said. Horrid Henry and moody Margaret carried the glop to the table. Then they sat down and stared at the sloppy, slimy, sludgy, sticky, smelly, gluey, gummy, greasy, gloopy glop. Right, said Henry. Who's going to eat some first? There was a very long pause. Henry looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Henry. Me, said Margaret. I'm not scared. She scooped up a large spoonful and stuffed it into her mouth. Then she swallowed. Her face went pink and purple and green. How does it taste? Said Henry. Good, said Margaret, trying not to choke. Have some more then, said Henry. Your turn first, said Margaret. Henry sat for a moment and looked at the glop. My mum doesn't like me to eat between meals, said Henry. Henry, hissed moody Margaret. Henry took a tiny spoonful. More, said Margaret. Henry took a tiny bit more. The glop wobbled lumpily on his spoon. It looked like Henry did not want to think about what it looked like. He closed his eyes and brought the spoon to his mouth. Yum, said Henry. You didn't eat any, said Margaret. That's not fair. She scooped up some glop and I dread to think what would have happened next if they had not been interrupted. Can I come out now? Called a small voice from inside. It's my turn to be Hook. Horrid Henry had forgotten all about Perfect Peter. Okay, shouted Henry. Peter came to the door. I'm hungry, he said. Come in, Peter, said Henry sweetly. Your dinner is on the table. Here I will be reading Horrid Henry's Holiday. Horrid Henry hated holidays. Henry's idea of a super holiday was sitting on the sofa, eating crisps and watching TV. Unfortunately, his parents usually had other plans. Once they took him to see some castles, but there were no castles. There were only piles of stones and broken walls. Never again, said Henry. The next year, he had to go to a lot of museums. Never again, said Mum and Dad. Last year, they went to the seaside. The sun is too hot, Henry whined. The water is too cold, Henry whinged. The food is yucky, Henry grumbled. The bed is lumpy, Henry moaned. This year, they decided to try something different. We're going camping in France, said Henry's parents. Hooray! Said Henry. You're happy, Henry? Said Mum. Henry had never been happy about any holidays plans before. Oh, yes, said Henry. Finally they were doing something good. Henry knew all about camping from Moody Margaret. Margaret had been camping with her family. They had stayed in a big tent with comfy beds, a fridge, a cooker, a loo, a shower, a heated swimming pool, a disco, and a giant, big TV with 57 channels. Oh boy, said horrid Henry. Bonjour, said perfect Peter. The great day arrived at last. Horrid Henry, perfect Peter, Mum and Dad boarded the ferry for France. Henry and Peter had never been on a boat before. Henry jumped on and off the seats. Peter did a lovely drawing. The boat went up and down, and up and down. Henry ran back and forth between the aisles. Peter pasted stickers in his notebook. The boat went up and down, and then up and down. Henry sat on a revolving chair and spun around. Peter played with his puppets. The boat went up and down, and up and down. Then Henry and Peter ate a big, greasy lunch of sausages and chips in the cafe. The boat went up and down, and up and down, and up and down. Henry began to feel queasy. Peter began to feel queasy. Henry's face went green. Peter's face went green. I think I'm gonna be sick, said Henry, and threw up all over Mum. I think I'm gonna be, said Peter, and threw up all over Dad. Oh no, sighed Mum. Never mind, said Dad. I just know this will be our best holiday ever. Finally, the boat arrived in France. After driving and driving and driving, they reached the campsite. It was even better than Henry's dreams. The tents were as big as houses. Henry heard the happy sound of TVs blaring, music playing, and children splashing and shrieking. The sun shone, the sky was blue. Wow, this looks great, said Henry. But the car drove on. Stop, said Henry. We've gone too far. We're not staying in that awful place, said Dad. They drove on. Here's our campsite, said Dad. A real campsite. Henry stared at the bare, rocky ground under the cloudy grey sky. There were 3 small tents flapping in the wind. There was a single tap. There were a few trees. There was nothing else. It's wonderful, said Mum. It's wonderful, said Peter. But where's the TV? Said Henry. No TV here, thank goodness, said Mum. We've got books. But where are the beds? Said Henry. No beds here, thank goodness, said Dad. We've got sleeping bags. But where's the pool? Said Henry. No pool, said Dad. We'll swim in the river. Where's the toilet? Said Peter. Dad pointed at a distant cubicle. 3 people stood waiting. All the way over there, said Peter. I'm not complaining, he added quickly. Mum and Dad unpacked the car. Henry stood and scowled. Who wants to help put up the tent? Asked Mum. I do, said Dad. I do, said Peter. Henry was horrified. We have to put up our own tent. Of course, said Mum. I don't like it here, said Henry. I want to go camping in the other place. That's not camping, said Dad. Those tents have beds in them, and loos, and showers, and fridges, and cookers, and TVs. Horrible, Dad shuddered. Horrible, said Peter. And we have such a lovely snug tent here, said Mum. Nothing modern, just wooden pegs and poles. Well, I want to stay there, said Henry. But I'm staying here, said Dad. No, screamed Henry. Yes, screamed Dad. I'm sorry to say that Henry then had the longest, loudest, noisiest, shrillest, most horrible tantrum you can imagine. Did you think that a horrid boy would like Henry would like nothing better than sleeping on hard rocky ground in a soggy sleeping bag without a pillow? You thought wrong. Henry liked comfy beds. Henry liked crisp sheets. Henry liked hot baths. Henry liked microwave dinners, TV, and noise. He did not like cold showers, fresh air, and quiet. Far off in the distance, the sweet sound of loud music drifted towards them. Aren't you glad we're not staying in that awful noisy place? Said Dad. Oh, yes, said Mum. Oh, yes, said Peter. Henry pretended he was a bulldozer, come to knock down tents and squash campers. Henry, don't barge the tent, yelled Dad. Henry pretended he was a hungry Tyrannosaurus Rex. Ow! Shrieked Peter. Henry, don't be horrid, yelled Mum. She looked up at the dark, cloudy sky. It's going to rain, said Mum. Don't worry, said Dad. It never rains when I'm camping. The boys and I will go collect some more firewood, said Mum. I'm not moving, said horrid Henry. While Dad made a campfire, Henry played his boombox as loud as he could, stomping in time to the terrible music of the killer boy rats. Henry, turn that noise down this minute, said Dad. Henry pretended not to hear. Henry! Yelled Dad. Turn that down! Henry turned the volume down, the teeniest, tiniest fraction. Terrible sounds of the killer boy rats continued to boom over the quiet campsite. Campers emerged from the tents and shook their fists. Dad switched off Henry's stapler. Anything wrong, Dad? Asked Henry in his sweetest voice. No, said Dad. Mama and Peter returned carrying armfuls of firewood. It started to drizzle. This is fun, said Mum, slapping Mosquito. Isn't it? Said Dad. He was heating up some tins of baked beans. The drizzle turned into a downpour. The wind blew. The campfire hissed and went out. Never mind, said Dad brightly. We'll eat our baked beans cold. Mum was snoring. Dad was snoring. Peter was snoring. Henry tossed and turned, but whichever way he turned in his damp sleeping bag, he seemed to be lying on sharp, pointy stones. Above him, mosquitoes whined. I'll never get to sleep, he thought, kicking Peter. How am I going to bear this for 14 days? Around 4 o'clock on day 5, the family huddled inside the cold, damp, smelly tent, listening to the howling wind and the pouring rain. Time for a walk, said Dad. Great idea, said Mum, sneezing. I'll get the boots. Great idea, said Peter, sneezing. I'll get the Macs. But it's pouring outside, said Henry. So, said Dad, what better time to go for a walk? I'm not coming, said horrid Henry. I am, said perfect Peter. I don't mind the rain. Dad poked his head outside the tent. The rain has stopped, he said. I'll remake the fire. I'm not coming, said Henry. We need more firewood, said Dad. Henry can stay here and collect some. And make sure it's dry. Henry poked his head outside the tent. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still cloudy. The fire spat. I won't go, thought Henry. The forest will be all muddy and wet. He looked around to see if there was any wood closer to home. That was when he saw the thick, dry wooden pegs holding up all the tents. Henry looked to the left. Henry looked to the right. No one was around. If I just take a few pegs from each tent, he thought, they'll never be missed. When Mum and Dad came back, they were delighted. What a lovely roaring fire, said Mum. Clever you to find some dry wood, said Dad. The wind blew. Henry dreamed he was floating in a cold river. Floating, floating, floating. He woke up. He shook his head. He was floating. The tent was filled with cold, muddy water. Then the tent collapsed on top of them. Henry, Peter, Mum and Dad stood outside in the rain and stared at the river of water gushing through their collapsed tent. All round them, soaking wet campers were staring at their collapsed tents. Peter sneezed. Achoo! Mum sneezed. Achoo! Dad sneezed. Achoo! Henry coughed, choked, spluttered and sneezed. Achoo! I don't understand it, said Dad. This tent never collapses. What are we going to do? Said Mum. I know, said Henry. I've got a very good idea. 2 hours later, Mum, Dad, Henry and Peter were sitting on a sofa bed inside a tent as big as a house, eating crisps and watching TV. The sun was shining, the sky was blue. Now this is what I call a holiday, said Henry.